What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the Magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website, except for this week, where it should have been part 6 of Chronicle of Bolas of the Core Set 2019 or M19 stories. But as of today, Wednesday, the day that we usually record these things, and I feel like a lot of other Vorthos content creators start planning what they're going to be recording for their week of content. Today they were like, oh, by the way, there's no story. And did you hear anything about that before today? Because I sure as hell didn't. And from being on Twitter and talking to other people online, nobody really did. So, surprise, I guess. But as we always do, and as I think Amy so eloquently put it earlier, we pulled something out of our ass to do this week. So, without further ado, I mean, you saw it in the title when you clicked on the video anyway, but without further ado, we reviewed, or we're reviewing this week, the weekly MTG The Future of Magic story video, or live stream, that was done from Thursday, July 19th, and it was put on the Magic the Gathering YouTube channel on Friday, July 20th. So, as we've been doing with the stories, if you want to, we'll put the link to the video in the description so that you can follow that link and go watch that video. But my quick review at the beginning of this is going to be, fair warning, this is going to be a little bit ranty, I feel like, of a JaAR. I feel like this is going to be a little bit not so nice. That's not really right. Not so happy JaAR, let's put it that way. I wasn't super pleased watching this video. I would say that because it was just under an hour, I wouldn't recommend anyone watch this. And we'll talk about that more at the end. But my quick review at the beginning is, don't watch it. Just stay here with us, join in the discussion, and then if there's something that we say where we're like, you know, this is what they said, and you don't believe that that's something that was said, and you want to double check us, please do. I always appreciate people checking our facts and making sure that you're not just believing what we said. Follow up and make sure that that's true, because we're not trying to, you know, pass misinformation. So we will include the link, as we said, to the video in the comments, so or in the description, I mean, so that you can go and check it out for yourself. That's my roundabout quick review. Amy, did you have a quick review of this video?
Yes. So mine was, if you have watched this video, we definitely want to hear from you in the comments for this one.
Oh, yeah.
If you have not watched this video, do yourself a favor and don't.
Yeah.
That's my review.
Okay, good. So if you still somehow feel compelled, especially if you feel like you're going to contribute to the discussion and you really want to watch the video first, despite our warnings to not, again, check out the description and then come back here afterwards and join in on the discussion. So onto the full review itself. This was a discussion. I wrote all their names down and their titles. We can go over it very, very quickly, but you basically had Blake Rasmussen and Steve Sunu, who work for the communications department, Blake as the senior communications manager and Steve as the associate manager of communications. So basically the appropriate people to host a weekly MTG, you know, stream that they have where they talk about all these things. It just, for that respect, it makes perfect sense to me that those two would be the ones to host. I don't know what their communications department looks like, where there might be more or others that would belong there more or less. I'm just saying that based on those two titles, it makes sense that they were the hosts of this. And then they were really interviewing Nick Kelman and Daniel Ketchum. Nick Kelman being the principal entertainment designer and Daniel Ketchum being the senior franchise art director, namely two members of the franchise department, which they talked about often, and that was why they were... Well, right, but that's why they were talking to them today. Or in that story, I should say, because it was not today at all. I don't know where to start because there's just so much. There's so
just
much.
Such a pile of garbage.
There's so much
into.
to talk about. So
swim.
So hold on, because I do want to say, not every second of this was bad. Some of it was interesting. Some of it was worthwhile. It just, in my opinion, was greatly overshadowed by a lot of the other things that went on. But if there was something, we tried to write it down and call it out.
There were a couple of points, a couple of lines that were said in there where I was like, yeah, that's really cool.
Yep.
Or that's an interesting point for somebody to make. Something that I wasn't expecting. But unfortunately, the minutes that comprised the grand total of instances where that happened was maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Out of, by the way,
out of an hour.
I think it was 59 minutes and 10 seconds. The other thing I want to point out, because YouTube is YouTube, and we live in that space, so I feel like it's okay for me to say this, because our comment section has very infrequently been the victim of it, but in some cases of not really JaAR videos. People don't really sit through JaAR videos to then leave rude and unnecessary comments.
Yeah, people don't usually just kind of troll here because the videos aren't
that popular.
Yeah,
where they feel like they would get
troll-worthy.
Yeah, well, and right. I mean,
if you're gonna troll, you might as well watch a video that's actually like just fun or super short.
So, but reading the comments on that video before watching it made it seem like there were terrible audio issues and that the guys were. I think through watching it, there were some jokes that they made that they thought were jokes that didn't really land. They weren't incredibly funny.
Nope.
But I appreciated the fact that these were 4 guys who liked each other, who were familiar with one another. I mean, people have said that, and I'm very grateful to have heard it, but people have said that about Amy and I, that, like, some of the crap that I say is just not funny, and that's fair, right? And I try to be funny on occasion, and it may make me laugh, and it may make Amy roll her eyes, or also laugh, but make you roll your eyes, and that's fine. But as long as Amy and I have a good enough dynamic, it still makes the show, in my opinion, somewhat interesting for people to watch.
Right, and we're not awkwardly revisiting it 15 times in the episode.
The Chandra...
So that we can be like, remember that funny thing we said?
Yeah. So...
We promise it was funny. Remember it?
And the reason I bring it up with the YouTube comments was because it was there. And so I mention it here very briefly. These are not professional streamers. These are not professional podcasters. That is not why they were hired by Wizards of the Coast. And that is not... I guess for the communications department, they should be communicating things to the community. But for like Nick Kelman and Daniel Ketchum, that's not their job, right? Being in front of the camera is not necessarily what they were hired for.
No, but they were hired to be professional, and I don't feel that they were professional either.
Okay.
And I also don't feel that they seemed extremely knowledgeable on exactly what it made sense for them to be knowledgeable about.
Well, that's been a discussion on a lot of our JaAR videos where we've talked about, I would say, non-individual story-specific topics. So, like when we did the Dominaria wrap-up video, and now this one as well, where we're kind of more able to look on the outside, which is interesting because that's one of the first things that I wrote down here was something that Daniel said, was that something that they're trying to do is take the story of Magic and the lore of Magic, which had been previously contained within the card frame, and break out of that card frame and move on to other mediums besides that card frame. Now, they elaborated on it and fixed that statement up a little bit, but the first thing I thought of, and again, this is a live format, right? We, as of yet, do not operate in a live format. And if we did, it would be a little bit of an issue. There are times where we do have to edit things out because Amy and I are stumbling over our words, or we completely forget where we were, or whatever. Like, it happens, right?
Or
That's
something super distracting happens over there, and we're just looking and going...
right. And that's the medium that we choose to operate in, so I can't fault them for saying the wrong thing live and then trying to correct themselves, because sometimes that makes it into JaAR videos too, where I say something and then I'm like, but that's not really what I meant, let me correct, and then I try to correct it. So like I said, they did try to fix it.
Doing that's a lot more, a lot nicer of a video than just a bunch of jump cuts, like...
Yeah. And I mean,
some weird, like, pieced together video.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some people who do that very well, don't get me wrong, who jump cut, and their videos are still fantastic, but regardless, that's really neither here nor there for what we're talking about. But, so, like I said, I can't fully fault them for, oh, well, he said this, and then he corrected himself, but that's really what he meant. Like, no. It's live. They want to make sure that they're getting the correct message across. So, there were a couple of instances of that, but if it's something that they said that they didn't correct themselves on, and I feel like they should have, I'm going to point it out today. So,
fair enough.
One thing that I think warrants at least a partial detraction on my part, we did find out today, based on something that Nick Kelman said, that Ken Troupe does still work for the company.
Yay!
Something that I personally was not aware of. I think that since a lot of the story team and a lot of the narrative team have moved on to other projects within Wizards, or been fired, or they have left to go pursue other avenues. I hadn't heard anything about or from Ken, and so I was just like, he might be gone. And I think I was a little cagey about it, that I wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. Now I can say for certain that he, at least according to Nick Kelman, right, that he is still with the company. So that's something that...
It's a lie.
That's something that when, like, for example, when we did the Dominaria wrap-up, that I was like, I'm not sure, but, I listed off all those other names. Mm-hmm. So Ken is still there. That's great and important. I wanted to bring that up for those of you that have been following along somewhat recently, to kind of close that door and close that chapter, that I was incorrect on my assumption that he might be gone.
Yay, Ken Troupe.
Then they talked about, yes, because Ken is great. And go watch our videos where we've reviewed his stories, and you'll see why we say that. They talked about, in this video, the development of Magic's story. And where it has come over the years, and where they are entering. And most of the time when I say they, I'm referring to Nick and Daniel, because again, Blake and Steve were doing more of the interview side than the answering of the question side and the discussion side. So most of the time when I say they, I'm referring to Nick and Daniel. But what they were talking about was having gone from the story team writing the stories, and it was a different author each week, and you got all of them collaborating on the story, to where they are now with one outside author still working with Nick, who had worked with the world building team to get all of the information out there to those people. What Nick was saying, and I can't tell whether this was real or whether this was him trying to minimize it, but he was saying that the writers were writing the Magic story, or working on the Magic story, after work at night or on the weekends, that it was like additional stuff that they were doing and not actually part of their jobs, and so now they're farming it out to the outside authors for that reason, so that they can kind of fix that issue. There was another thing that they said later, much later, towards the end of the video, where they were talking about the transition between the story team and the franchise team. And again, I noticed a pivot because Blake specifically asked, and I believe it was a question from a fan, of what was the transition like going from the story team to the franchise team. And the response that I believe it was Nick gave was that we didn't, or we haven't transitioned he's like, I just came in and started working with the world building team. But notice what he said. He said the world building team. The question was the story team. And from my understanding, and I'm very well maybe incorrect, but the world building team and the story team, or at least the narrative team, seemed to be different. They have named themselves different things over time, but I think for a while they were like the R&D narrative team, and then they were the story team, and the world building team was always something different in my eyes, or they would have, you know, gone from world building to then going and writing the stories individually afterwards. And it's like, okay, but the person who asked that question didn't ask about the world building team.
Yeah.
They asked about the story team. And for you to say that there was no transition is wrong. Again, this is my assessment of what I heard.
I mean, realistically, to him, there was no transition. He came into a clean slate because
a year ago.
Everybody else was already gone.
Yeah. And that's what we talked about this in the Dominaria wrap-up, where we talked about the fact that people like Michael Yu Chow, Mel Lee, Kimberly Kreines, I'm going to forget some here, and I apologize. I gave the whole list, and I'd written it down back then.
Right.
And Kelly Diggs. I mean, Kelly was around for Dominaria, but otherwise, all of those people were gone by that time. And so there was a blatant transition. It's just that for, like Amy said, for Nick it might have been easy because he just came in after everybody had been fired or moved on to other projects within the company, or for most of them outside of the company.
So for him, there was no transition.
But to not acknowledge that seemed a little disingenuous. Again, I've been wrong before.
It seems a little like they didn't want to open that can of worms, because once they do, who knows how long it's going to take for them to actually try to redeem themselves from whatever they go on to say.
Yeah, it just seemed, and there were other instances here, and maybe I took it a little bit personally, but these were hard-working people who did damn good work that we really enjoyed. And that is not to take anything away from Martha Wells or Kate Elliott, because they have also done damn good work, most, if not all of which, we have really enjoyed.
Right.
There are little slip-ups here and there, but again, as we said, like, for example, with the Dominaria stories, I did not in any way think that Martha was a bad writer because of it. I just thought that, you know, there were certain stories that didn't quite hit the mark, and a lot of that, from our assessment and other people's assessments as well, had more to do with her interactions with or her liaison between the prior Magic stories and continuity than it did with her writing ability. And that's super important and kind of caters our expectations and understanding. But so when I hear somebody saying like, oh, well, there wasn't much of a transition. Yes, there was. It was
a heck of a big transition for us.
Well, I was going to say, you and the company may not have noticed it, but us as the readers definitely did notice it. And for you to not acknowledge that is upsetting. It's upsetting to hear that.
You know, I'm not surprised. Of course they didn't acknowledge it. Because like I said, that would have opened such a can of worms that interview would have been twice as long.
Yeah,
just from them answering questions of people complaining on Twitter about how, you know, they're not talking enough about the fact that the story team's gone.
Right.
Or whatever.
Yeah, it's another big point that was brought up, because there's a big wrap up topic that I want to do at the end. But another big point that was brought up a lot, and you know, I mean, I wear these shirts every week. It's not a new thing here on this show, but I picked a Marvel Comics shirt for today on purpose. Yeah, which is, you know, the wrong choice, but that's fair.
My shirt's better than yours.
You bought me this shirt.
I bought both of them, so just be quiet.
I was just going to say, you bought me this shirt. Anyway, but the reason was Daniel mentioned that he came from the world of comics, specifically Marvel Comics. He was an editor for multiple different franchises, if you will, or teams, books within the Marvel Universe, and specifically mentioned X-Men. He specifically mentioned a couple, but he seemed to focus the most on X-Men.
Right.
And
Punisher and Spider-Man.
Right. Right. And what he said was, or what a lot of the discussion was, comparing Magic Story to comics. Fully understandable. I, personally, we have done it in this video series, many, many times. Because it's...
I feel like, though, that we haven't done it as many times as they decided to do it in this one video.
That's fair. That's definitely a fair statement. But it's the world that Daniel knows, and it's the world that he came to Wizards from, presumably showing, at least on the part of Wizards of the Coast as a company, that they were interested in his experience, his expertise, and his knowledge from that medium, from that company. Because you cannot deny the success of Marvel recently, whether it be comics or, more obviously, digital media such as movies, clearly, but also television, whether that be actual TV in like shows like The Gifted and Legion, or Netflix with the very popular Marvel Netflix series of, the Defenders and everything that branched into that and out of that. And it seemed like the reason that was brought up so much is because that's where they want to go. They made that very clear. And that's...
Not that they want just TV stuff, but that they want to use comic books as a, like you said, a model.
A measuring stick.
Yeah.
And that is good and bad. It's good because it works for Marvel and DC and Dark Horse and, Image Comics. There are so many different, and indie comics and things like that. I don't want to limit it. But something that I believe it was Nick said that troubled me a lot, and I think Amy as well, because we both looked at each other and were like, what the hell? He said that they wanted to, I want to make sure that I say this right, they want to branch out into novels, graphic novels, movies, comics, and television. Movies and television makes perfect sense. But one of the other big points that Nick mentioned at least 3 times in a 5-minute span was that the readers of the web fiction are a very small part of their audience. Now, I highly doubt that they are a very small part of our audience, because what else is the point? But they probably know that information due to the metrics of their website.
Right.
The number of clicks on that article. The number of people that go and read the articles every week. As opposed to get a summary off of a YouTube channel or something like that. Or maybe...
We review, we do not summarize.
Right. But maybe you come just to hear our review anyway. Even though we say that, go read the story first or whatever. And that's a possibility as well. Because it's a written medium, and unfortunately, these days I feel like, and my assessment may be wholly off, but it's 2018. I feel like if the opportunity is presented to most people for their phone or a book, they're going to pick their phone. And that's a discussion in and of itself about society and how things are changing and etc. And that's not where I'm going with this. But my point is, if you are stating 3 times in 5 minutes of an hour-long video, maybe 10 minutes, if you are stating 3 times in that period of time that the people that read your web fiction is such a small portion of your audience that you are looking to branch out into other things because your lore is not getting out to enough people, why? Why go novels? You did that already. And then stopped doing that.
Because you realized it was better.
So why? Why novels? You did comic books too. Because it was literally asked of you as a question at the end, which you, whether it was truly tongue-in-cheek or whether it was disrespectfully, but Vronos, an amazing creator and story personality within the Vorthos community, asked the question, you used to do comics and novels and all these different supplementary pieces of material. Are you doing more of that you can talk about? And they were like, not that we can talk about, ha ha ha, video's over. Okay, but you just finished saying that you're looking to do those things and talked about the fact that your web fiction readers are too small.
Right.
Too small of a group. Which...
You really emphasized that.
Yes. Too much.
And then you emphasized the fact that you want to do all these other types of media.
Including novels.
Right.
What?
Which doesn't make sense.
What?
And they talked so much about, they just compared it to comic books so often that people who had no clue that they had ever done comics would not think that they had from this video.
Right, and they might think that it's a cool idea.
I swear that the two of them had no clue.
I wouldn't agree with that last portion. Literally everything else, wholly agree. I wouldn't agree that they had no clue especially because that question from Vronos was picked beforehand, so I assume that Blake went over it with them, and so they had to have known, even if it was just at that moment, that the comics existed, and I'm sure it was before that moment, at least a little bit.
But what I'm saying is, watching the video, it felt like when that question was asked was the first moment that they even realized that the company that they work for had done comic books.
For the Magic Story.
The Gathering.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Even if that's not the case, it sure felt like it when you were watching the video.
Right. And like I said...
So, like, make it not feel like that.
Right. And like I said, movies and TV makes perfect sense. You cannot look at the success that Marvel and DC, because DC has been all over the realm of television, not even to discuss the realm of comics, but they're all over the place with TV shows, live action and animated, as well as animated movies that they've been putting out, maybe straight to DVD releases or whatever, that have still been doing quite well. And so you cannot look at those mediums and say that that is not a goal for any fantasy, sci-fi, etc. property these days, because that would be foolish. For them to not be pursuing those avenues would be foolish. And it seems that they are, which makes, again, like I said, makes perfect sense. But don't in one breath say that the people that you're asking to read your web fiction are too few, and then say you're going to go writing graphic novels and novels.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me, especially when your company has already done comic books and novels previously and moved away from that for a reason.
Right.
There was a reason for that. And so to me, I stopped, I paused the video, and because, and I did that a couple times when I was writing my notes, but I paused the video and I just wrote WTF in huge letters. And look, it's right there.
Yeah.
I wrote it in big letters on my notepad because I was like, what is happening? Why is that something that's being discussed? Because here's the other main thing, possibly the last thing that I wanted to talk about. This video was titled, and the live stream was touted beforehand as the future of Magic story. Right? The weekly MTG stream, the future of Magic story. But in your video, on your live stream, you said 3 times in 5 to 10 minutes that the people that read your web fiction are too few of your audience, and that you're looking to do other things. So here's my question, and maybe any of you could answer it for me because I sure as hell can't. Who was that live stream for? Who was it for? Because it wasn't for your story fans, because you insulted them multiple times by saying there aren't enough of them, so we're looking to do other things.
Right.
Sure. It did not seem like they were saying that they were going to cease doing the web fiction to do graphic novels and movies and television. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that you put out a video where you're going to be talking about the Magic story, and then no less than 3 times you talk about the fact you minimize and belittle that subset of your fans. It blows my mind. Who that is a Magic player who doesn't already read the stories would have watched that video to begin with? Who? It would have been nobody, because it's like, oh, well, I don't know anything about the current Magic story, so why would I watch information about the future of the Magic story?
Well, and that's the reason why all the comments on that video were bad. Because they didn't know their audience. When they did the video.
Right. And the questions that they answered were good. The like Q&A questions, at least the rapid fire ones were neither here nor there. They were, I think, many of those were more fun, like, you know, around the lunch table kind of questions of like, who would win in a fight, this person or this person? That is cutesy stuff that would have been great if the rest of it wasn't so, like, rage-inducing for me. That, like, that would have been fine because you have a group of people who are then showing that, like, Allison Lures and Blake Rasmussen in the Magic Story podcasts did stuff like that, where they talked about, like, you know, what so-and-so would have for breakfast, or what they'd have for lunch, or, you know, what they would talk about at a lunch date, or something like that.
Yeah,
that stuff.
It.
Oh, okay. And I was going to say, that stuff...
Because it wasn't substantive. Like, I want something real.
It wasn't informative, but at least to me, at that point, it showed that there was interest in these stories and these characters outside of, well, this is my job, I gotta write this story now, right? Because they take the time to think about, what would Elspeth have for lunch? What would Veraska talk about at the breakfast table? Like, you know, all of these things are supplemental at best, but things that show their interest as creators and as employees above and beyond their 9 to 5, if you will. So to me, that was really important. But for this video, not so much, because it was so overshadowed by everything else.
Yeah, and I really got the impression that they're not interested. Like, Daniel said he was multiple times, like too many times, in basically the same exact way every time, but never really showed that he actually was. And they kept bringing up Chandra for some reason, as if she's like the only planeswalker in existence. I don't know.
Yeah,
it was weird.
Right. And so the other point I wanted to bring up was a lot of what was talked about in that stream had to do with the business side of things. A lot of it. I mean, it was, we're looking to branch out into this world and this medium, and we're looking to do this, and we're hoping to do that. And we want to merchandise, and we want to get these characters. We want these characters, Blake mentioned it, we want these characters, we want my mom to know who Chandra is. Now, from a business standpoint, that makes perfect sense. You want your characters to be a household name. If I walk up to Joe Blow on the street and I say, "Excuse me, sir, do you know who Jace Bellerin is?" 99 out of 100 times, no way would they know who that is. But if I walked up to that guy on the street and I said, and it would probably have to be a more obscure character, because like if I said who's Spider-Man, before the movies, most people could probably still tell you who that was. But if I walked up to a random guy on the street and said, "Can you tell me who Black Widow is or who Hawkeye is?" Before the movies and the popularity of the Avengers movies, I would bet most people, I wouldn't say 99 out of 100, but I would say maybe half the time, people still would have no idea who that is. Nowadays, much different. Much, much different. Now, I don't have any statistics to prove that, and so it's solely my opinion, but it's based on the how much it's ingrained. I mean, I have family members who are super out of touch and could still tell you who all of those people are, right? Every member of from the original Avengers movie, right? Maybe not Scarlet Witch, right? Maybe not Vision, right? From Age of Ultron and Infinity War and Civil War or whatever, but they could tell you who Black Widow and Hawkeye are, because that was a big movie, and there weren't a ton of characters in it where you wouldn't be able to know who they are. So
unlike Infinity War,
where everybody was there, from a business standpoint, that makes perfect sense. But, and this may be too harsh, but it may not be, but this wasn't your live stream to your investors.
Right.
Where you have to talk about what your future plans are for the product and for your characters so that they can become household names. I don't care.
Right.
Like maybe I do, but I don't, like, especially not in the way that it was presented here. I don't care. You talked about the video was titled "The Future of the Magic Story," and you talked about making Chandra Snuggies.
Right. Which is irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant, because as Daniel put it when he was talking about that, right, merchandising is very important. Don't get me wrong. Like, merchandising is super important and a great way for people to maybe more easily recognize your characters.
Well, but do it the right way.
But it also has literal zero to do with your story.
Absolutely.
Just because I know your character's name and likeness doesn't mean I know anything about them outside of that.
Right.
Literally anything. It has nothing to do with story. Nothing at all. And unless you're showing the two, like, Chandra and Gideon hugging each other or kissing, it doesn't show me anything about their relationships either. Because that was something else that was brought up that they thought was extremely important, was the relationships and you know, who's smooching who was something that brought up that infuriated Amy, which was...
Yeah, because I was like, I don't care what sort of weird, like, you know, I don't care about who's smooching who. Like, I care about the substance. Like, I care about the actual, like, actual interactions, actual dialogue, and deep character development. Who's smooching who isn't deep. That's like what 14-year-old who's on Instagram is now reading the stories because they need to find out who's smooching who.
Mm-hmm.
Like, give me something real.
Well, and it's all the stuff that leads up to it. So, for example, if the next thing you told me was, no, it's actually Gideon and Liliana who are smooching, I'd be able to tell you why and what all of the character build-up to that point was from the Dominaria stories and their interactions together there when they truly did become closer as individuals, and so you would know why they're smooching each other as opposed to just they're smooching and isn't that a great buzz thing to, again, to have on the art of a card, right? Gideon and Liliana holding each other or kissing or whatever, and then you have all of your players that aren't part of the story going, oh my god, what happened there? And then maybe actually being willing to go and... Because that was my other point. that I made to Amy while we were watching this, and not making it to her like, you need to understand, like just saying like it would have made more sense to me. If you're talking about making this similar to comics, but you're talking about wanting graphic novels and comic books and novels and TV shows and movies because the people who read your web fiction, there's not enough of them. Why not try to make the web fiction more accessible? Why not try to make more people interested in reading the web fiction? Why not release, when you send out, and this is an example, right? I'm not trying to say Wizards doesn't know anything and I'm the only one. That's not what I'm saying. Here's just something off the top of my head. Wizards of the Coast releases things to decorate LGS's, local game stores, for pre-releases, release weekends, draft weekends, etc. They release,
the Thopter,
the Thopters, the posters, the hanging things, right? There's story behind why this is all burnt up, and there's the facade in the background, but the brighter, like, spray painted on white version in the front here. There's story behind that. And if you didn't read the Aether Revolt story, you wouldn't understand it. And if that was up in the store, sure, there's a revolt, because that's the name of the set.
Right.
So yeah, I guess I get that. But if there's, and you have your story spotlight cards as well, but have a little blurb, right? If somebody's match finishes early, maybe they go and sit and play Commander. Maybe they go and sit and eat some food or have something to drink really quickly. But if you have a little pamphlet or a little, like, poster with a bit of story in it, like, what if the bottom of this poster for Dragon's Maze just had a little bit of a story as to why there was a Dragon's Maze?
Yeah.
And then right at the end, want more? Go check out mtgstory.com or whatever. Like, whatever the link is, make it super quick and easy for them to find, but instead you want to make novels again. What? Like, and again, I'm not trying to sit here and say that I know what's best, right? Take my suggestion because you guys don't have any idea. Not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, it seems like
you've been there, you done that.
It seems like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, because you're saying that there's not enough readers for the web fiction. Let's make novels.
Right.
What? Maybe I'm missing something. But I doubt it. But and again, if any of you have insight, thoughts, opinions similar to us or completely different from us, we always want to hear it. This is never, if you're new to the show, we are not, if you say something in the comments and you're like, I disagree with you because X, Y, and Z, we will not respond to you and be like, well, you're an idiot. Like, we want to hear your opinions, and we would have a discussion with you, or we just want to hear what you have to say, and maybe you'll change our minds. Because I'm always open to new thoughts and opinions, and that's why there's two of us, because sometimes we bounce ideas off of each other, and Amy will say something, I'm like, well, I thought of it this way, and she can sway me to her point or vice versa, like, and so we hope that you guys can get involved in the conversation as well.
Also, can anyone explain to me?
Probably not.
Probably not. Why who's smooching who is first of all, relevant in this century.
I told you it upset her.
Second of all,
oh, the best.
Relevant to Magic players, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ever. Like, if you're looking at Magic the Gathering players and you're like, gee, how do I get them to enjoy these stories? I know who's smooching who. What?
I don't, but again, I don't.
Who does that?
Yeah, I know. And the only thing I can think of, is that who's smooching who would be something that would attract non-Magic players.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
To the story.
That's why I said before, 14-year-old kids on Instagram or whatever.
Well, and you
having absolutely nothing to do with Magic the Gathering can become a fan now, and they can buy their Chandra Snuggie, and they don't actually care about the story at all. Well,
and you and I were talking about this earlier before we started filming, when we were, either in the middle of the video or we just finished watching it. But if, for example, in one set you saw Chandra and Gideon hugging each other, and then the next one, it was Gideon and Liliana. Like, that's super soap opera-y, and that you were mentioning is more for the older crowd than the younger crowd. For like, soap opera. Ooh, it's a love triangle. Like, okay.
Yeah, like, okay.
Sure it is.
So are you trying to attract young teenagers, or are you trying to attract senior citizens? Because if you're trying to attract anyone in between, you're missing the mark with that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry.
Well, so the other thing I wanted to talk about, just to cover it, because I said that it might have been the last thing, but it wasn't, because
it never is.
Nope. I did a little bit of research, and it's few and far between. I used to do that a lot in the beginning of these, and now it's just like there's so much stuff that I do it when I can, and otherwise I ask you all to tell me if and when I'm wrong. But in this case, I just did a quick Google search. Because they talked about wanting to have the comic book, to have a similar model to comics, right?
They didn't actually say that, though. They were real shifty about it.
But,
like,
right.
Oh, we want to do something new and incredible that no one's ever done before.
Well,
but we're just going to do exactly what comic books do.
Right. And it's because what they, so that's a contradiction that I wrote about here, yes, is that they mentioned that they have a great art reputation, right? That I think the phrase was second to none, is their reputation in the art community for their magic art and what they do for the magic artists and things like that. And they wanted to do the same thing for their writing, but they want to do it similar to the comics in terms of the writing style, where they want to get outside people to come in who maybe are super successful, maybe like marginally successful, and they want to give them a platform. And they want them to write these stories. And, for example, Core Set 2019 has been great so far. We've had 5 out of 8, and I've loved, I think number 5 just now was the only one where I was left scratching my head a little bit from last week.
Okay.
And it was only a little. I still think overall that story was fine, and all the other ones were great. I enjoyed the first 4 greatly, and the 5th one only slipped a little in my eyes and was not Dominaria in terms of continuity issues and character issues and things like that, which again, I don't attribute to the author by any means. But all that being said, there were 12 Dominaria stories. There were 8, or are going to be 8 M19 stories. Comic books, because they talked about the fact that, you bring in fresh writers for comic book properties, like X-Men and Avengers and Spider-Man and Thor and Captain America, all these individual comics as well. And it's, sure, that's true. But I looked up online, and it was a little bit hard to find, but I found it. Typical runs of comic books, because that's what they call it, is, the one that I know of offhand, because I'm a huge fan, is Chris Claremont's run on X-Men, meaning the comics that Chris Claremont wrote for the X-Men. Some of my favorite comics of all time, personally, but that was, and it was somewhat of a legendary run, but it means all of the comics that he wrote, right, for the X-Men as a property. And I looked up some pretty popular comic book runs. They were anywhere from 40 individual issues of the comic to over 100. That, and if you know anything about comics, you know that comics are typically released weekly. Typically on Wednesdays, but typically weekly, these comics are released. So even if you do 40 comics, the minimum of what I saw of the list of 20, like, good, legendary, or some of the best runs in comics that I looked up, maybe it was 10, but it ranged from 40 to over 100, up to 150 or so. If that's what you're looking at, 40 comics is 40 weeks.
Yeah.
That's almost a year. In fact, it's 3 months away from a year? I think. Yeah, because it's or 2 months away from a year. Because it's if you consider 4 weeks to a month, that's 10 months out of 12. That's almost a year. Now, I guess the argument for that could be that comic books in total would be much, much, much less writing than a Magic story. One Magic story. Like one issue of a comic versus one week of the Magic story are much different in terms of, the number of words, like the word count. But still, you're still writing for a comic to come out every week versus a Magic story to come out every week. And you want to go with the comic book model, but you switch people out every 2 months.
Right.
So it doesn't track with me. It doesn't make sense to me. And again, maybe someone knows that information and can say, like, no, actually 40 issues of a comic, if you look at word count, versus 8 weeks of the M19 story is comparable. Again, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, but with how long the stories are, they could break them up a lot more and do sort of pieces of story.
Well,
like leave cliffhangers at the end of every single story so people really want to come back and read the next one and make them a lot shorter.
We've been saying that for years. I feel like years now. Just over and over, we're like, just cut them up.
Yeah.
Like, make them shorter. And because they're supposed to be like episodic, so it's supposed to be like you're watching a television show. You come in, you sit down, you read the stories. But to be fair, what Amy's saying with cutting it down, you know what else that would do? Make them more accessible. Not a lot of people have time to sit there and, we have sat for an hour and a half to 2 hours reading these stories sometimes. And again, we've said this before, that's me reading it out loud, where it takes that little bit more time than it would if you are sitting there solitary reading it to yourself. But
think about it. How many times do you think somebody has sat down, clicked on that link, looked at how long the story was, and decided, nope, I don't have time to read this?
I can tell you how often. Per person, probably only once. Because it's not like they're going to try again next week. And even if they do, then that will be the last time. Because it's not getting much shorter. And so then they'll just wait. They'll wait for someone else to tell them, or they'll just stop caring. Because they don't have the time. And it's unfortunate because we are people who love reading the stories. We read them long before we were doing JaAR, and that's why we started doing JaAR, was because we felt like it was something that we wanted to get out into the world and continue the discussion and show off our...
#Porthos Pride.
And yet, it's not for everyone. I go to the local game store when I can for pre-releases or drafts or things like that, and I end up talking to people. People will look at me and be like, so what's going on in the stories these days? Like, when at the end of Hour of Devastation, we found out that Raul Zarek was working for Nicol Bolas. I mentioned that. People were surprised because that's a big reveal.
Right.
It's a big reveal. Because Raul Zarek is a character that people still recognize these days. And it's like, wait, he's evil? I didn't know he was a bad guy.
And he wasn't evil or wasn't supposed to seem evil.
Right. It was a secret. Well, especially because a little bit earlier on in those particular stories, we'd seen Jace talking to him like it was no big deal. And yet then we find out that he's working for Bolas. So, yeah, a huge reveal. And it should be a big deal on Ravnica when it finally comes to pass as well. So you've got... anyway, I'm not going to go into all that. That is for a very different time. But that's how you get people interested. Because outside of the story, I haven't seen that anywhere.
Oh.
Really, literally anywhere. You revealed it so long ago. You can't talk about that somewhere. You can't say, like, well, now that we know that Raul Zarek's a bad guy... Because if you just casually mention that among a group of Magic players or Magic fans, and 50+% of them have no idea what you're talking about, they're going to want to hear that story. They're going to want to know why Raul Zarek is a bad guy. That's compelling. It's interesting, right? Ugin's origin story. arguably interesting. Ugin is a cool character that was super impactful as a card, and to see him appear, and even if you were casually aware of the Khans of Tarkir story, the fact that brought the Fate Reforged story that brought him back to life, and now you get to find out that he's Nicol Bolas's twin. Some people may find that lame, but some people might think that that's really cool and interesting and want to learn more about it. Make that stuff, make the stories more accessible before trying to branch out into so many other different things where you're literally just going to end up going back to what you complained about at the top of the video, where you said that people were writing the stories at night and on the weekends because they were stretched too thin. Well, let me tell you something.
Stories were a heck of a lot.
Yeah, but let me tell you something. If you're trying to branch out into movies and television and novels and comics and the web fiction as well, and the art and the cards and the lore and the talk about being spread too thin, like, again, that's in and of itself another, I feel, contradiction.
Yeah, for sure.
So
and that's why the thing you just mentioned before was why I got upset about how they seemingly think, oh, well, the way to get a larger audience is by making the story less substantive. And it's like, well, maybe if you want to get an audience that doesn't actually care about the product, but if you want people to actually care about the product, then putting out a shorter, more accessible, yet substantive version of these stories, where maybe you break them up and you just have them last longer. Gee, doesn't that sound like a great way to reach more people and get them interested and want to stay and actually read these stories on a consistent basis?
Or what you could do is delay the release of your story a week because there's commander previews, even though you've never delayed your story for previews before.
Right.
But if anybody asks, tell them that it's because of the previews.
Right.
Even though that's never been the reason before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or get people super interested in the Dominaria stories because they're huge fans of the history of the plane, bring them back, and then not even be able to maintain the continuity from your story that you released a month and a half ago, let alone multiple
the
years
stories
ago.
from years ago. Yeah.
That's the other way to get people interested.
Yeah. Also, do an interview where you shit on your fans multiple times
and say that the people that read the stories are not numerous enough.
Right.
But the only people who I believe would have been interested in watching that video were the people who read your web fiction and wanted to hear where you were going with it further, and they watched it only to be belittled.
Right. And disappointed because none of the other information that you provided was stuff that they wanted.
Unless they're your shareholders.
Yeah.
Because then they get to hear about all the things that you hope to be doing in the future, which, to be honest, if I'm a shareholder...
Which are all money grabs.
Well, right, but if I'm a shareholder, there are no results there. So maybe if I'm a shareholder, I wouldn't want to hear that either.
Right.
Like, it's just... And it sucks. It genuinely sucks. Because we don't... If you're new to the show, we don't come here to shit on the company every week.
No.
That's not what we do. It's not. We're here to read the stories, enjoy them, and enjoy character discussions. I love that so much, which is why I said M19 has been so good. The parallels between the twins on Tarkir, Baeshia and Naiva, and Ugin and Nicol Bolas, or just Nicol, so good. And in this we find out that that was entirely Kate Elliott's idea. And that they weren't going to do that to begin with. Okay.
Well, thank God they brought her in.
Because That's some of the best stuff. We've talked about that every week. We talk about the parallels between before the story, like the flashbacks, and then during the flashbacks, and then after the flashbacks.
Because honestly, those pieces of these stories are the only thing that makes them almost as good as the stories before they changed the format to let's bring in new writers who have no idea about the stories beforehand. Before
the transition that wasn't a transition.
Right. They didn't transition.
There's a lot of snark in this one, and I somewhat apologize for it, but I also don't.
Right.
Because it's how I feel, and I want to know how all of you feel. Do you agree? Am I being too harsh? Do you disagree? Like, I really want to know, because, and like Amy said, let us know if you watched the video or if you didn't. Let us know if, because of what we've said, if you're actually interested in watching the video, or if you're like, that sounds terrible, no way in hell. Am I going to waste an hour of my time? Because...
But if you have an hour and you want to laugh and be pissed off at the same time,
watch literally anything else. Anyway... it's so weird. I want to at least bring this up. It's going to bring it down a lot before the end of this video, and so I'm very, very sorry for that. But Amy and I watched another video today that hit kind of close to home, and so I wanted to say, I didn't tell you this, I'm very sorry. If you are a fan of the Game Theorists or Film Theory here on YouTube, just know, if you saw the video that came out today, Wednesday, the day before our video is going live, if you saw that video, just know we love you all and our thoughts are with you today. And with something that Matt said in that video, if you're looking for someone to share that story with and you don't think you have anybody else, we'll listen. So please feel free. I can't promise you we will answer immediately, so there are much better resources than us. I will definitely say that.
Always.
Much better resources than us. But if you're looking for an ear, a Facebook message on our Facebook group, a Twitter message, a direct message on Twitter, they go a long way, and we would be more than happy to listen. So please, again, we send all our love. Like I said, it hit kind of close to home for us, so just know that we are here if you need an ear. Like I said, we should probably be your last resort, but if you need one and you don't know where else to turn and you need to hear it, we're here. So, all that being said, I want to thank you all for watching this rant-filled video where we talked about lots of different things. I desperately want to hear all of your thoughts, opinions, agreements, and disagreements in the comments down below. As we mentioned earlier, sure, I'll do it twice. That would be you showing off your...
#Vorthos Pride.
Thank you guys so much.
I really want to hear that too, because, I say that in every video, that I really want to hear your comments and your analyses.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But this one in particular, because there were so many things wrong with this video.
Yep. So let us know what you liked the least. Let us know whatever you want. Anything and everything.
Or, please let us know that you liked it as well.
Yeah.
Because I really want to hear that.
Yep. Desperately.
That would make me feel so much better.
Yeah. So
to hear that at least somebody got something positive out of this.
Anything and everything. Comments, Facebook, Twitter. The links to our Facebook and Twitter, if I didn't say it earlier, down in the description below. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching this, another episode of JaAR, here on Geek for All. Next week, supposedly, we will be back with part 6 of the M19 stories.
You're so hoping.
But you know what? If you like this type of stuff, here's what happens when they give us no notice whatsoever and we have to make a video. We make it longer than all the other ones.
Even though it's based on something random.
So, for us here, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks so much, everybody.